Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the studio. My name is Jens. Stefan. And yeah, this already said welcome. And we have a guest here on Google Hangout. It's Sharon. He's joining us from New York. We need to switch on the sound. Did you switch the cable? No, switch the cable. Thomas, we just have to switch on the cable. Who of you know Thomas Sharon? Yeah, we had several conversations to make this happen. I'm super happy that this worked out today. We did a try, and we had also a survey for asking what is the most interesting topic for you, and it was about the culture and mindset, which we share a lot. So I think all the tools and practices they actually the circle. You need to have the right mindset to practice that. I'm super curious to hear the talk from Thomas, and actually we want to make something interactive. What I understood, I have no clue what Thomas' plan is for today. Thomas, you ask us if you need any help, if you should switch on the light or do something here, and I would say stage is yours. Huh?
All right, sounds good. Sounds good. People in the back, can you hear me? Raise your hand. Can you hear me clearly? Okay, perfect. All right, one more hand raising. How many people here are designers or UX designers, things like that? Perfect. How many product managers, product owners? Perfect. That's why you don't know me. That's fine. That's perfectly fine. So if you see my little picture at the bottom, then apologies. This is coming from my phone. It's right here. I'm going to look at the deck most of the time, so I know what I'm talking about. But I'll try and peek from time to time and see that you're alive. So today we're going to talk about lean UX, user experience, and the mindset you need to develop products that people desire. I'm going to tell you about a great idea that I have. I thought of developing a flying car, and I locked a few mechanical engineers and a designer in a garage in New Jersey, and they're working on my idea for a flying car. I'm going to go back to my flying car in a few minutes. This is a book that I published recently, Validating Product Ideas Through Lean User Research. It covers some of the topics that I'll go over today. And it's available for you if you're interested to purchase directly from my publisher, Amazon, or whatever works for you. This is what we're going to talk about. I'm going to share 20 different user experience definitions. What is user experience? Then 6 lean UX mindset concepts. And then 6 attitude and behavior factors. I'll explain when I get there. It's a key part of what I'm trying to communicate today. And then 4 pointers for awesome user experience in whatever it is that you're developing. So let me start with user experience and the 20 definitions. When people hear the term user experience, they think about beautiful colors, princesses, a lot of beautiful things and brushes of color happening in their product, a lot of aesthetics that is kind of a part of the product, and in general, beautiful things. The problem starts when they realize that user experience is a little bit more than that, And the confusion gets even bigger when user experience people try to define what is user experience. So let's go over some of these definitions very quickly. So some say user experience is everything you see below water. What you see here is UI. So when you hear people say UI, UX, they mean UI is what you see, UX is all the work behind it. People try to understand that user experience is a lot of things. It's not just UI. It's research, it's design, it's prototyping, it's usability, visual design, the culture around it, and so on and so forth. While a lot of people, when they think about UX, they only think about interface design and visual design. This is another attempt to define what's user experience. Visual design, information architecture, interaction design, usability, user research, and content strategy. This is a more complicated definition. The elements of user experience, probably one of the best-selling user experience books. This is how Jesse James Garrett defines user experience. And then there are more or additional attempts that are, again, beautiful, look like maps, throw a lot of buzzwords into the air. The User Experience Professionals Association created this thing to explain clearly what is user experience. Not doing a very good job. A lot of people like colors to explain that, so I'm not going to go over that very deeply, but a combination of colors and buzzwords. And there are more and more. I think I stopped at 20, and I'll share kind of my definition for what is user experience, and it's very, very simple and basic. User experience is what people feel when they use something. If you think about it, this is what we're trying to do. We're designing the experience, not necessarily only the screen, and we're trying to create positive emotions. And when we do design, that's what we aim for, and when we do research, that's what we look for. From here, I'm moving on to 6 Lean UX mindset concepts. So Lean UX is, in my mind, a better way of approaching user experience design and research. Calls for less waste, very iterative process. And to me, because Lean is great, that's the way to go. And that's what I recommend on trying out, especially if you're new to user experience. So here's what I mean by that. So what I'm going to do now is with these 6 mindsets, I'm going to show you one side and the other side of them. So psychology versus technology. I'm going to give you an example from Google. I worked for 7 years at Google and Google Search, and but before that, I was involved in an advertising product, and that team came to me with a question, and they asked me to try and help them with answering that question. And the question was this: we have latency problems in our product. Latency very quickly. Once you click a button, how long it takes for the action to take place. So that's a very basic explanation of latency. And they said we have a lot of latency problems. We don't have a lot of time to fix all of them before we launch the product. We want your help in prioritizing. What are the latency problems that are important to fix? So what we did, long story short, we invited some of our users into a room, and we removed all indications of time from the room. So if they had wristwatches, we asked them to remove them. We took away their phones, removed the clock from the screen they used. They had no sense of time. And what we asked them to do is a series of tasks. We measured how long it took them to complete the tasks, how long they waited for different actions, specifically the ones with high latency that the team was interested in. And what we also asked them immediately after is, how long did you think you waited for each one of these actions to take place? And what we found was very interesting, that and this helped us to prioritize the latency problems to solve. A problem to solve was a problem that it took, let's say they clicked the button, it took 2 seconds for the action to take place, but they thought they waited 9 seconds. So this is a problem we should have fixed. If the opposite happened, so if they waited 9 seconds, but they thought they waited 2 seconds, and that happened, that's not a problem we should fix, even though 9 seconds is a very long time. But if they perceive the time that they waited as 2 seconds instead of 9 seconds, that was a good thing to have. So that is the psychology. There are ways to kind of keep people occupied as they wait and they don't feel that they're waiting. So the psychology of the design is sometimes more important than the technology. And what I argue is that lean startups are in the psychology business, not necessarily technology business. The second mindset is a problem versus solution. I'm sure you're familiar with this book. Eric Ries has published, I think, 2 more since he published this one. And the key thing there is that you first need to spend more time on the problem rather than the solution. He argues that a lot of companies are perfectly executing the wrong plan. They're creating a beautiful, usable product that nobody needs. And the reason is that they didn't spend a lot of time, what I call falling in love with the problem. And going back to my flying car as an example, if I would have spent a lot of time understanding the problem I'm trying to solve rather than thinking about how cool it would be to have a flying car, I might have realized after maybe going to the nearest mall and spending 15 minutes watching people in the parking lot that the world is not ready for a flying car because they can't even park, for example. So falling in love with the problem is a key to understanding users, a key to building successful products. And in my mind, again, I argue lean startups are in the problem-finding business. Solutions are not always easy, but in my mind at least, it's much more important to deeply understand the problem and then come up with the solution that solves that problem. Third mindset is the distinction between user and experience. A lot of people, when they think user experience, they think about design. But the user, even in these 2 words, comes before the experience. And lean startups are in the user business. The experience is, again, relatively easy to create, to design, to build, once you understand the user. Understanding users, their motivations, their goals, their abilities is much more complicated than creating the design. Next is R&D. We see a lot of R&D departments, and many startups invest more in the D part rather than the R part. So they jump to developing products. They don't do a lot of research beforehand, and if they do research, it's what's called technological research. It's not research to understand, again, problems and users. The way to go about that is to recognize assumptions. Assumptions are sometimes facts that we have in our minds that are not true. We don't have any basis for these assumptions, and we consider them as facts. And the key thing is to recognize that these are assumptions and then test them. So, for example, people are afraid of flying cars. We might have that assumption and think of that as a fact. People are afraid of flying, something like that. But that's not true unless I recognize that this is an assumption and do something to prove it. And again, going back to lean startup, instead of developing or adding more features to a product, progress in a lean startup or in a lean startup approach means learning something, not necessarily making something. And again, I argue that lean startups are in the learning business rather than in the development business. A lot of people, a lot of engineers start with the idea, start developing it, start creating a solution, start the design, rather than stopping for a second and understanding and learning a lot about the problems they're trying to solve. Goals versus features. So here's a little exercise I want to do with you. So I'm going to show you a series of features of a product that you know. If you know what the product is, raise your hand and keep it up. Okay? All right. First feature is this internal combustion engine. If you know what the product is, raise your hand and keep it up. Okay. Second feature, 4 wheels with rubber tires. If you know what the product is, raise your hand. Transmission connecting the engine to the drive wheels. All right. Too much beer. Engine and transmission mounted on metal chassis. Some people have an idea. Okay, this might help. A steering wheel. If you think you know what the product is, raise your hand.
Here in Germany, Thomas, so we have a problem with that.
With what?
What you're trying to tell us.
All right. What I'm going to show you now are 2 goals users have with this product. The first one is comfortable to sit on. And the second one is that it cuts grass. Whoops, that was not what I wanted. Sorry. Cuts grass quickly and so on. So that just shows you the difference between developing a product based on features, a list of features, and developing a product based on user goals. And obviously what I would do with my flying car is not think about the features of the flying car, but think about what are the goals? Why would people fly a car? And start from there, and maybe then the solution might not be a flying car. So lean startups are in the goals business rather than feature business. And lastly, number 6, and I'm going to spend more time on that, the difference between attitude and behavior. Attitude is what people say about their behavior, and behavior is what they actually do. So I'd first say that lean startups are in the behavior business. And I'm saying that because a lot of people with ideas for products or with startups, they very quickly launch a survey to start asking people for their opinions about different things. And what I'm saying now and what I'll demonstrate to you now is that opinions you should care less about opinions and care more about people's behavior, because people's behavior is much more telling than what people say. So my recommendation, and if there's one thing that you remember from this talk today, is this: don't listen to users. Don't even talk to users. Don't ask them what they want. Instead, observe their behavior. Try and see what they do, and that behavior will tell you what you need to do. I don't listen to users because of the psychology of attitude and behavior. This has been studied for many, many years now, about almost, I think, 80 years now. And it has been proven that there is no strong positive relationship between attitude and behavior. What people say about their behavior is sometimes the opposite of their actual behavior. And in many cases, it is not. Even if it's not the opposite, it's not identical to the actual behavior. I'm going to give you 2 examples. for studies. So this is a study from 1937, a long time ago. So students were asked about their attitude toward cheating in exams. And the researchers who collaborated with the teachers, they passed along a questionnaire and asked students, given an opportunity to cheat in an exam without getting caught, there's no chance that you're going to get caught, would you do it? So they were asking about an opinion about a future behavior. And the students answered. And a few weeks after, in one of the exams, again, the researchers collaborated with the teachers here, the students were asked to complete the exam and in the end grade themselves. And they were told that their grade would count as the final grade for the exam. And then what happened, and they submitted the exams and the teachers graded them also and compared. And then a few weeks later, there was close to zero correlation between attitude toward cheating and actual cheating. So people who said that they would never cheat, cheated, and the opposite. Okay. Many studies found no relationship between attitude and behavior. I'll share some of them. And when that happened, so social psychologists started asking, okay, we understand that there is no high and positive relationship between what people say about their behavior and what they do. Let's try and find out what affects that relationship and see what we can do about it. Because tracking behavior is really, really hard, and tracking attitude is relatively easy. You can just ask. So these are 6 factors that affect the relationship between attitude and behavior, and I'll explain why they're relevant to something you can do with your products. So the first one is the level of measurement. So if you ask about a general attitude, it can't help predict specific behaviors. So for example, or I would say a specific and unique attitude might, not necessarily will, but might predict a specific and unique behavior. I'll give you an example. Let's say that the specific behavior that you're interested in is likes, comments, and shares on Facebook. You want to know, let's say, how many friends, likes, comments, and shares people have on Facebook. It would be very general of you to say, to ask a person, to what extent do you consider yourself a social animal? And then based on that answer, conclude that they have a lot of friends, likes, comments, and shares on Facebook. That is a general attitude. Here's another example. Again, the difference between general and specific attitudes of married women toward using the pill, and see what happened here with this specific study. So the researchers asked women about their future intent, and then got back to them a couple of years after and asked back about things that actually happened. And they realized what you see here, that the more specific the question was, the higher the correlation with what actually the behavior was. So if you're very general, like use birth control, there's almost no positive correlation. But if you're getting more and more specific, for example, using the pill as a birth control in the next 2 years, then it is more likely that this is indicative of actual behavior. All right. The second thing that affects the relationship between attitude and behavior is the time between measurements. So the principle is this: positive correlation between attitude and behavior increases if the measurement time difference is short. The reason is that people's attitudes are not very stable and they change over time. Here's an example. Some of you may be familiar with this. I have been doing a lot of usability testing in the past, and a common thing that you might see is that a user is using something in a usability test and then says something like this. You know what? Give me a piece of paper. I'll sketch what you need to do. You need to do this, the button should be here, the words should be that, and then that would be very useful for me and much better for me. When people who are not experienced in usability testing see that, they say, the user has spoken, let's just do that. And then what happens is, if they actually do that, development takes time, so 3 months or a month or whatever time after, when the thing is ready, they come back to the same user, and then with the working thing, and the user says, oh, you know what, I didn't mean that, things have changed, and so on and so forth. So if you measure the behavior, the attitude, very close to the behavior, that's fine. But if there's a longer gap between the asking and the actual behavior, then chances are that they're not going to correlate very well. Next is the way of acquiring attitude. If you ask somebody about their opinion, it really matters how they got to have that opinion. So here's a question for you. Joey, who is 10 years old, wants a video game he played at a friend's house. His friend Mark heard about the game from Joey, and their friend Andy saw a commercial for that game. Now I'm going to ask you, who is more likely to nag their parents to buy the game? Joey, who played it, Mark, who heard about it, or Andy, who saw a commercial? Who thinks it's Joey? Raise your hand. Okay. Who thinks it's Mark that heard about it from Joey? All right. And who thinks it's, what's his name? Andy, that saw the commercial. Okay, most of you don't think anything at all at this point. All right, I understand. The answer is that Joey, who experienced playing the game, he experienced that in the most meaningful way, and therefore his way of acquiring the attitude will affect him in a way that will help you better predict his future behavior. The principle is this: past experience clarifies attitude and increases its positive correlation with behavior. Here is how you can apply it. So if you do usability testing, ask about opinions after users actually experience the product. So in a usability test, you have them try something out, ask after. Ask questions about their opinion after. If you ask about opinions about different products before they try them, that will have less likelihood to predict behavior. Second application, ask about past experiences rather than predictions of the future. So if you want to learn, and this is a question I'm getting all the time from startups, startups want to know from people 3 things. They want to know if people would use their product, they want to know if people would pay for their product, and they want to know how much they pay for their product. All of these are requests for predicting the future. The problem is that people don't have any idea. And the bigger problem is that we'll share their opinion anyway. So be aware of asking about questions about the future. Instead, ask about recent past behavior. So if you did you have this and that problem in the last week? Yes? Okay, tell me about it. Now they're telling you about facts and not about predictions of their future behavior. Next is the clarity of attitude. The principle is this: attitude and behavior correlation increases when the attitude is clear. So here's another example from a study. So students participated in elections if they had more information about candidates compared to students who were not very up to date with candidate information. So it makes a lot of sense, but a lot of people choose to ignore that sometimes and ask people who they might see as their audience who have no knowledge or vast knowledge about the problem they're trying to solve. Ask them for their opinions and ask them for predictions of future behavior, it is less likely that you're going to get answers that are going to help you. Quite the opposite, they're going to distract you and give you wrong data. So if you ask people that are relevant, that have prior knowledge that is relevant for your product, it is more likely that their opinions will be closer to their actual future behavior. Accessibility of attitude to conscious. So conscious accessible attitude better predicts behavior. Here's another study. So computer geeks spend a lot of time thinking about their own computer software preferences, and people's attitudes better predict behavior when they're asked or hear about them repeatedly. So if I'm into something, if I'm doing something many, let's say, hours a day or many days a week, my opinion about it will better predict my behavior related to it. And lastly, and this is something you have no control over, the personality of the person you're asking. People with high, it's called self-monitoring, do not demonstrate consistency of attitude and behavior. So, and these are people who are self-monitoring are people who are concerned with their self-presentation, and they closely monitor themselves to ensure desired public appearances. This is what I call the fake smile. So it's very hard to predict behavior based on attitude of people with high self-monitoring scores. If a person is always smiling, is always positive because they think this is how the environment will better react to them, then it's very hard to connect that to their future behavior. This is something, again, that you see in feasibility tests, people miserably failing to complete each and every task, and yet in the end, when you ask them about their opinion about it, about the product, they're extremely satisfied. They couldn't do one thing with it, but they're extremely satisfied. What does it mean to you? Well, this is just a joke, but the key word here is never. Never ask people what they need. I know this is very common and a lot of people do that, but never ask people what they need, because humans suck at predicting the future. And the bigger problem is that they're happy to give you their opinion. So if you think you are doing customer development by asking people what they need, you're not. You're misleading yourself. Instead, again, observe what they do. For example, when you're with a person that you see as a potential customer, ask them, show me the most frequent task you typically do related to whatever it is that you're interested in. And then they demonstrate to you behavior rather than words that are predictions of the future. Never ask what's their feedback. In many cases, startup founders come to me and they look for feedback, they turn their laptop to me or give me their phone to see their app, and I push it back. Never ask what's people's feedback. I see a lot of bias going on with that. For example, what do you think about this cool share button? The word cool is now telling the person you're asking that you think it's really cool, and they better think that it's really cool because then they'll be helpful. The reason is that they'll tell you what you want to hear. The human nature is one of being very helpful. People want to be perceived as good people, as smart people, helpful people, and therefore, when you ask them questions about something you developed, they are looking for clues in your body language, in the words that come out of your mouth, that will help them understand what is it that you're looking for, and they try to match what they do and what they say with that perception. They have no idea what they're talking about. So try and avoid it. Instead, just ask them to use the thing. Ask them to use the thing, give them a task, watch them use it, and shut up. And if they say, when you talk with them, they say, oh, I usually do blah, 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 just stop them and ask them, can you show me how you do that? Show me how you do that, and then you'll see that it's very different than what they say. All right, I'm talking a lot, so I'll finish with 4 pointers for awesome user experience. And these are just 4, but in my mind, they're really important, and they're based, again, in the human psychology. So first, biosensory information. And I'm only picking one aspect of it, which is color and contrast. This is an app from Air New Zealand that's called How Far Can I Go? You play with this arrow here, and that changes the amount of money. And based on the money you're willing to spend, it shows you how far can you go with a flight from New Zealand to multiple directions. But that's not important. What's important here is what I wanted to show you about color and contrast. So first, they're using, if we're looking, that's one minute color theory. When you're using colors that are opposite to one another, so for example, orange and blue, the contrast is really good. So if you see, the orange here has a very good contrast compared to the background of blue. As soon as you start using colors that are close to one another on the color wheel, then you begin to have contrast problems. So for example, blue on blue, green on blue, and so on, that would be problematic and harder to read. And I'm pointing out some of these here. You can see that here, you can see that here even. Shades of blue over shades of blue, not high contrast. The high contrast is only happening when you use colors that are opposite to one another on the color wheel. So if you see, try and pay attention, there are two or three combinations of colors that are really kind of popping out when you see them. That's blue and orange, purple and yellow, and red and green. So if you see these pairs, you first kind of understand that, you know, what are people doing here, and you see that the contrast is very well. When I look around me right now, I'm at a WeWork location in New York City. I'm in a conference room. I can show you an example from that right here. You see this chair? This chair is orange, and the color of the background is blue. Again, this is another example for that. So it would be smart of you to use contrasting colors and not colors that are next to one another on the color wheel. 1 second. All right, almost. That's one. The second thing I would recommend is understand what's called pre-attentive processing. Pre-attentive processing is the processing that goes through your eyes and your brain in the first quarter of a second. So within a quarter of a second, we understand a lot of things about, in this case, the product that we're looking at. I want to give you some examples, and this is an exercise. What I'm going to show you are 2 squares with a lot of shapes in them. Okay? I'm going to show it very quickly, as quickly as I can. It's not going to be a quarter of a second, but it's going to be close. What I ask you is to find the pink circle. So immediately after, I'm going to ask you to tell me, where was the pink circle? The right-hand side or left-hand side? Ready? Where was it? If you think it was right, raise your hand. If you think it was left, raise your hand. Okay, it was right here. All right, that was easy. Okay, let's make it harder. Shape selection. I want you to find the pink square. Okay, if you think it was right, raise your hand. If you think it was left, raise your hand. Okay, so you see how this is working. This is, you can figure these things out very, very quickly. Let's try one more thing, conjunction of features. I want you to find the pink circle. That was harder, but that's usually what happens in, let's say, website. Okay, websites. Let's try that. So let's look at web pages. I want you to tell me which website is the better site. Okay. Which one was better, the first or the second? Okay, 1 second. That's the limitations of presenting remotely. First or second? If you think it's first, raise your hand. Second, raise your hand. All right, that was easy. But this is the processing that is happening in milliseconds in people's minds. So be aware of it. I gave you two very kind of extreme examples, but this is processing that happens within milliseconds. People have a perception about whatever it is that you show them very, very quickly. They can predict how usable the site will be, how easy it will be to use the thing very, very quickly. Pointer number 3 is prior knowledge. How many of you know what this is? This is the Jitterbug phone. It's a phone for elderly people, and it has a lot of features that are reminding them of this phone. For example, the size of the phone is really big. What happened with the old phone, the old rotary phone, is that you can put it on your ear and it would reach your mouth. And this phone can do that as well, because I don't know if you noticed, but with a lot of elderly people today, when they use a kind of a normal smartphone, they do something that looks like that. And the reason they do that is this phone, because they're used to using this phone, and they think their prior knowledge is that this is how it should work. So this is just one feature of the Jitterbug phone that is building on prior knowledge. Another example is as soon as you open the shell, you hear the line, because that's what's happening. That was what was happening with the rotary phone. You picked it up, you heard the line. You don't really need it in a smartphone, but they did it because that's the prior knowledge that these people had. And it is a very successful phone with the elderly. So the pointer is identify what your users already know, because what they already know is going to tell them how to use your new thing, even if they knew nothing about your new thing. Okay, they're going to apply knowledge that they have on the new thing that you're giving them. And lastly, emotions. Identify what makes people tick, what makes them cringe, and what makes them happy. A lot of people, when they do research into products, they find problems. But I argue that the opposite is also true. Find out what people love, what people enjoy, and what people find that makes them happy, and try to understand why, and try to do that in your product. If you're into academic research, then this paper specifies 25 different positive emotions that are raised through using products and why, what features cause that. All right, I'm almost done. Quick recap. Lean startups are in the business of psychology, problem finding, users, learning, goals, and behavior. Psychology of attitude and behavior. Pay attention to these factors: the level of measurement, the time between measurement, way of acquiring attitude, clarity of attitude, accessibility of attitude to conscious, and the personality of the person you're asking. And the 4 pointers for great UX: biosensory information. We talked specifically about color and contrast. pre-attentive processing that happens within milliseconds, prior knowledge, and emotions. Last thoughts. When you say to yourself, I have a great idea, you pretty much have no idea. You don't really know anything about your product. What you need to tell yourself and your team is that you're going to learn about it together. And as the great poet said, if you want to be a great archaeologist, get out of the library, said by the smart Indiana Jones. Learning is not happening in your office. Learning is happening with your users. So go out and spend time with your users, and that's lean and mean. That's it. That's all I had for you. Thank you very much. Shameless plug. If you want to learn more about understanding and researching user needs, this is a course I developed with Treehouse, which is, I think they're mostly, it's an online video course. I think they mostly focus on coding, but they also offer this course. Yeah, that's it. I'll disconnect from my phone and switch to my laptop so I can look straight and see you. All right.
So I switched on the light, Thomas, so that you can see a little bit better who's in the room. And yeah, first of all, yes, thank you for the great talk, and now it's open for questions and answers and discussion. Or silence. But there's no sound in the line, so sorry.
Too much psychology for this time at night.
I might have a question. How important is the quality of your users? Like, how close do they have to be to your potential product idea or the product you already have?
So in the past, I would have answered that it doesn't matter. But today, I would say it does matter. So don't pick anyone from the street if they're not knowledgeable about what you're trying to solve. Try and see that even the few people that you talk with are somewhat knowledgeable and relevant to what you're trying to offer. If you remember earlier, we talked about the difference between attitude and behavior. These people, when you ask about their opinion, it matters more than people that have no knowledge. That said, in the past, when I did a lot of usability testing, we always recruited 5 people that are like that are kind of related to the product. And then we had 2 extremes. One person that is pretty much from the street trying to complete tasks with the product, and another person from the team. So an engineer from the team. And what we looked at is this: with the person from the street, if they fail to complete every task, that's fine. But if they succeed in anything, that's a very good signal. And with the person from the team, if they succeed in completing all of the tasks, that's okay, we don't learn anything. But if they fail, that's a problem. So I would say, yeah, the people should have some prior knowledge related to what your product is doing.
Thank you.
I have another one. So when you think about product teams in an agile environment, where is the UX guy located? What does she do? I mean, is it part of the product team, part of the engineering team, between the 2 of them? What is your experience here?
It's one team. It's one team, and in my experience, every team has 3 kind of 3 heads: engineering, product / business, and design / research. So there may be sprint 0 before sprint 1 that involves some kind of basic research into who users are and what they need. But I would bake, and that's my experience again, every design and research activity into the normal sprints. Not easy, but it's doable.
Maybe another one in this. What are the challenges when you work in one team? You say it's not easy. What are the things you see that happen often that teams have to cope with?
The biggest challenge that I see is that nothing against engineers, but I've seen many engineers that are interested in when they want to test and when they want to design. They want the design to be as perfect as possible, and then test. And if you ask any user experience person that knows what they're doing, they would want the opposite. They would want to test something as early as possible, and there's always a tension with regards to that. As a user experience person, I would have to say that as early as possible is the best way. It saves you most time after.
What would be the perfect ratio in the team setup? So how many devs, how many UX, how many? Or is it 3, 2, 1 or whatever?
So I would say, I mean, I can easily say it depends and so on and so forth, but I would say a ratio of one designer to 3 engineers is a good ratio. Yeah. Which is hard to accept, but a lot of organizations learn that the hard way.
So what are the strongest arguments for the UX for a company that does not have any at all?
If they don't have any at all and are not interested, then I wouldn't even try. If a company doesn't have any UX people these days, especially a software company or a company that develops software, lost case.
Look for a new job.
I mean, there are the better companies are companies that don't have any UX people, but at least they hire agencies to do that work. That's better, and then it's easier to kind of start a UX practice there. But if they didn't do anything about it so far, and didn't ask for it, then move on.
I guess it's a very cheap option to leave that one out.
I think the world today, gives opportunities to join companies who really want to invest in design and user experience. There are more and more companies that want to do that. The problem is the opposite. There are not enough designers, or not enough good designers to fill in all these roles that companies are looking for. I don't think the problem is that there are companies who don't want to do it. Not anymore.
Can you outline how a product manager should work together with the user research in user research? So how should that be?
I'm not sure what the question is.
Yeah, sorry. You're not sure.
What is the question?
How should the product manager work together with a user research team?
Oh, so I don't have a definite answer. I can tell you about my experience. My experience has been I had bad experiences and good experiences. The way that worked best for me is to very quickly establish that there's no competition between the two, because sometimes you would see a product manager that's being asked by their managers to do a lot of interviews with people, with users. And then the researcher is like, why are you doing that? That's my job. And the opposite. So first, the times where it worked really well for me is that we all understand that we are one team. And if a product manager needs to interview users, the researcher is the best person to help them do that and do that successfully. So first, I would say it has nothing to do with research or product management. It's about relationships between people. Just be respectful of one another with one goal to collaborate and do good. And from there, everything will be easy. User researchers, and I know that some of them don't like it when I say that, most of what they do is not rocket science. Most of the research is something that you don't need a PhD for, not even a master's, and sometimes not even less than that. Sometimes after very basic training of 3 hours, a product manager can do very good research with using different techniques, and it's also my preference that they do that. Researchers are good for mentoring these product managers and for doing the 20% of research that is complicated. For example, field work, observing people and how they behave and understanding what that means when it comes to design and making roadmap decisions for the product. But it's mostly about creating that shared understanding and collaboration more than research skills.
IBM has an approach of sponsored users, where 2 or more users are part of the product team. So it's not just doing research and testing, they're involved in the whole process. Do you have experience in this kind of co-creation, participatory design?
Yeah. That thing has a name. It's called participatory design. So that users participate in the design process. I think in many cases it's very useful for development team members to interact with users and understand their point of view and understand their behavior. That said, I oppose any attempt to turn users into designers. Users are users. They should be able to behave. They have no understanding and knowledge of how design works, of how software development works, and so on. So I would prefer involving them and having them participate in a way of research that's happening in front of team members or with team members in the room possibly, but not as a part of a team that works on a product and on a design.
Okay, thanks.
How much any test or anything that would show someone that calls themselves a UX designer that they are actually a UI designer, and that makes it really visible to them, and that they would accept the fact? Do you know the problem?
Yeah, of course. I face it every day when I interview people. Yeah, I asked them to tell me about the research they did for their design. And if they don't have a good answer, then they're not a user experience person. They're a UI designer. And I can ask the same question about how they plan the information architecture on the page or the screen or the product, or how they came up with the content and tested it, and so on and so forth. User experience is a lot of things, and I'm not saying everyone should be perfect with everything, but at the minimum, if you are designing the user interface, you should at least be able to understand how to research it. So if they don't do that, then they are, and not that there's anything wrong with that, they are a UI designer not a UX designer or interaction designer, whatever we call it these days.
I think we have time for one more question. You had one.
How do you see the role of A/B test playing in this whole field when you go from a more classical approach of asking the user directly in terms of inviting them and seeing how they work with your product in terms of iterating, or like compared to iterating fast and just seeing what the data tells you, because the data is not necessarily always what the user is also really wanting to do, but what you want to see to improve, right?
Yes. So first, A/B testing is a very, very powerful tool. I use it all the time. The key here is to not use it as the only research method, because A/B testing will only bring you to a kind of local maxima. You will improve what you are doing, but you may completely miss something that you're not doing and you're not testing. So in combination with other methods, perfectly fine. If this is the only thing that you do, I would recommend you consider adding more tools to your kit.
Okay, Thomas, thank you again for joining us, and also that you took the time, because we started a bit later than we actually planned. And yeah, thank you everyone for
Thank you guys. Have a good night.
Have a good night to you.
Bye-bye.
The rest of the day. And yeah, I mean, we can have a short drink if you like, but actually I promised to move out at 9 of this place. So maybe just a very short drink if you like, and then maybe we move out at 9:15. Yeah. And if you have any questions about where you're in here, Catherine, Jens, and me, we are responsible for the product dojo. So this is just a 2-day or 3-day workshop where we practice things that Thomas was talking about. Yeah. And enjoy the rest of the evening, and
bye guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Man muss nach Kreuzberg gehen. Nach Kreuzberg. Auf der Hauptbahn und dann noch weiter. Wahrscheinlich.